So I do the intro, you can, wow, there we are. So the big question this morning, Robyn, is it, hey y'all, or is it howdy? Because I can't seem to get it straight.
It kind of just depends on what kind of vibe you're going for. I would say howdy, y'all, as if you're talking to a good group of friends. In this case, I think howdy, y'all is fitting. Otherwise, hey, y'all is just as great.
Howdy y'all, howdy y'all. Good morning, good morning. Well, listen, there are people that have their name is like all over all kinds of textbooks, and they've given 4,000 workshops, and I've had the privilege to pick their brain. But there is something special about this lady. So just to introduce myself, Uri Schneider, lead here at Schneider Speech. We've been really learning a lot and enjoying sharing these conversations. Something that a lot of people don't know is that these conversations are not only live, and you can see them live, and you can drop comments, and I try to incorporate that with our guests, but you can also catch them on the playback. So we kind of chop them up and take some good notes if we can. We put those on social media, but you can go to our website, schneiderspeech.com/our blog. You can see all these videos for playback. In particular, the conversation on Sunday with Braden Harrington and Jonathan Costello and Elazar Abrahams, three young guys who stutter, talking and reflecting about what it means to them to have Joe Biden, a person who stutters, kind of ascend to become president. It was an unbelievable conversation. The thing blew up. It's got 4,000 views and counting in just a few days. I have no doubt this one is going to be blowing up as well. But you can see it yourself at schneiderspeech.com/our blog. I also, and I'll say why I'm saying this afterwards, but if there are any students out there or anybody out there who's interested in helping us not only enjoy and be enriched by these conversations, but if anyone wants to help us come up with like a highlight reel. So if you're listening to these conversations and you're like, oh, that was awesome, that should be a post, or that should be on the highlight reel at the end of 2020. We would love your help. So feel free to reach out to us through the website. And if it's a one-off thing, like you heard one, and you could just tell us which number it was and at what moment you enjoyed what was said, we can try to chop that up and come up with a nice highlight reel. Or if you want to become more involved more significantly as an intern or something like that. And without further ado, let's move into today's conversation. So we have a very busy person who's up very early in Texas, in Austin. Let me tell you something. If I was in a blackout in New York City, like I was, my wife and I, there are certain people you want to be with. I wanted to be with my wife, but if I had to be with someone in addition to my wife and kids, I would hope Robyn would be around. And the reason is this young woman has enough energy and electric soulfulness to light up the block. Okay, so the only question I have for today's conversation is, what do you eat for breakfast? What keeps you going?
Ori, I feel like I could ask you the same question. You are always lifting other people up, but you have that electric energy. So I would like to know what you eat for breakfast. Ironically, I don't really eat breakfast. I'm more of like a coffee kind of person. I've got it right here. Drink a lot of coffee, and then I eat more like brunch. I'm a snacker, so I'll eat throughout the day, if I'm answering your question
Lately,
literally.
yeah, no, it's amazing. I guess you're too yeah, you're busy doing yoga and all kinds of stuff, too busy to eat, I guess. But the answer to your question is they call me Shake Master Schneider.
Okay. Yes.
I've lately gotten into the shakes, and if you slip in,
Oh,
some chia seeds and some crushed flax, amazing things happen. I'm
wow.
not sure if everybody has the same response to those things, but it's gets me going. And I think, Robyn, to your point, when you're around, other people light up. So you think I have such energy, it's because when you're in that orbit, you create that. And I definitely can share with that. I was talking about that conversation with those three young guys. I was just so happy to be there. I said, I'm happy to be like a helium balloon tank and put helium in other people's balloons. At times blow my own balloon as well and receive from others as well. But 100% lifting people up is what it's all about. Robyn is far more accomplished and further along than you might know. She's a PhD candidate at University of Texas with our good friend and mentor, Dr. Courtney Byrd. There's some big news coming out from there, which we'll get to hear about. We had the privilege, started with Taylor Sweezy, big shout out to Taylor. She was our first intern when she was in New York City from Texas. And we had this amazing internship experience together. And then I got these emails from a person named Robyn Croft, and somehow, embarrassingly so, I think we actually did respond that there just wasn't an opportunity. But this Robyn Croft, she was persistent, and persistence pays. I think as students, you should know that. I think as professionals, when you're looking for support or help, and if you're a person who's going through any kind of challenge, know that, you knock once, you knock again, you keep knocking, eventually doors open. So Robyn was great about being persistent, and what it culminated in was an amazing opportunity while she was studying abroad in Israel. We'll talk about that. I was there as well, and we were able to do a remarkable project together, research together, and then we had the privilege to go to the NSA in Atlanta and present that together with good friend Andrew Carlins, who's also had a conversation with us with his mom. Check that one out. But Robyn is amazing, and she came in as someone, I think you were still before grad school at that point. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, but you were like already out the door with your postdoc. Robyn's amazing, and the spirit and the spunk and the youthfulness should not disguise or somehow not allow people to really see one smart lady, and she's really doing amazing things, both in real life, touching people's lives, but also in contributing to the literature and the research. So I'm just so excited you're here. You were the recipient of this year's NSA Award, Research Recipient Award. It was a monetary award for your research going forward. So maybe we'll hear about that, but it's just great to see you.
Thank you, Ori. It's really just such an honor to be here. And I am so grateful, really. That's all I can really say. I'm so grateful for everything that's led me here, for being connected with you, that you answered my 115th email. Just kidding. It wasn't that many. You definitely did get back to me.
Like 97. No,
like around 97. Yeah, no, I'm just really grateful. Honestly, that's all I can really say. And every opportunity that I've had along the way is really a reflection of the people who have invested in me and taken the time to give me a chance. And I'm definitely still learning. So I'm at the very beginning, I'd say. And I look out at the world and just see how much more I have to learn. So it's an honor to
look at you. Look at you. Look at us. Look at that. Just getting started. It's fantastic. Paul Rudd reference. That's awesome. Awesome. What would you share? Because by the time we met, you were kind of already interested in stuttering. Is that right?
Yes.
So what is a nice Robyn Croft growing up in Texas? You got lots of things going for you. How do you end up spending so much time emailing this Schneider guy about stuttering and your passion to get experience, in that space? What brought you to get let up with that?
Yeah, let me see if I can say it concisely. Grew up in Houston, Texas, went to UT Austin for my bachelor's. And I didn't know that I wanted to study speech language pathology. I came in as many freshmen do. Yeah, there we go. I think this is like Rock On, and this is like Hook 'em Horns. Very similar though.
In New York, we don't do any of those. I think this is like West Coast, and then there's Tupac. There's like Tupac, and then you guys do the horns, but it's not this. It's
the thumb has to be on the middle two fingers. Yeah, it takes a little bit of practice. I've had many years growing up in Texas. But yeah, I actually switched my major a few times. Started as a social work major, then psychology, both of which I've come back to for like interdisciplinary work. And psychology I find to be essential to my research, and I love digging into that area. But once I settled on speech language pathology, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I started looking for opportunities to do research when I was a sophomore. similar to when I was emailing you, I sent every professor in the department at UT an email asking, can I do research with you? It's kind of like that book, Are You My Mother, where everyone just says no, and you just keep on going. So everyone said no. They were full or
Robyn,
they couldn't take
I just was
students.
talking about how smart you are, but if you think I look like your mother, that was clearly part of the evolution. No, I'm not your mother, but yeah, turning and looking for where you're going to get that mentorship, who's going to open a door for you, and how are you going to
Exactly.
become a little bit more multifaceted through another opportunity? That's awesome.
Absolutely. And ultimately, Courtney Byrd was the only one who responded and said yes, which looking back is just the biggest gift of all time. I feel just like that was fate. And I was so
It's
grateful.
also it's also a gift. I'll just mention, and I mean, I have the utmost respect and admiration for Courtney, but yeah, you got an email response. That's not so easy these days. She's very busy.
It's
She's very busy. She gets backed up.
email is a very hard thing. I feel for every important, busy person who has to keep up with their email. I don't know how anyone does it. And since then, we've really grown like tremendously. So nowadays, you wouldn't be able to secure a research assistant position through email, but it was back then. It was back in the day. So that's what kind of got me into stuttering. I didn't know anything about stuttering before, but once I started learning from Dr. Byrd, I was just hooked, and I knew I had found something really special that I want to do for the rest of my life. Then comes junior year, where studying in Israel was a goal of mine. I'd gone to Israel when I was 18, and again felt a very immediate connection and knew that I wanted to somehow blend my passions for Israel and for my profession. And so on paper, going to Israel didn't really align with my degree plan. There weren't specific courses that fit into what I needed in order to graduate, but I knew that I needed to go and somehow make it fit. And that's when I started researching. I literally Googled stuttering Israel, and what pops up? Schneider Speech, and I knew that there were some multiple locations of your practice. And that's when I started sending you emails. And I thought, oh my gosh, here we have bilingual, bicultural therapy for stuttering, and it's in Israel where I'll be for a few months. This is also just the stars aligning. And then after I started as an intern, we made it into this, independent study research project, which was phenomenal, such a great learning opportunity. Then I actually got to know you, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've stumbled upon this amazing mentor. And so it turned out to be this really rich experience that I couldn't have penciled into my plan because I didn't know that it existed, but it was just all of those little steps leading up to it. And yeah, one thing led to another.
There's that Yiddish saying they say down in Texas, right? Man plans and God laughs.
Yes, people say
Um,
that often. Hear that
you've
just
got
from
to
the street.
be you've got to be open-minded. You've got to see opportunity when it knocks, and when when you get to a fork in the road, take it.
Mm-hmm.
Get a little bit out of your comfort zone. Great things happen. But yeah, so it really didn't add up or make sense. But I mean, mutually, it was so beneficial. You were one of many outstanding. I don't want to put you in any place other than others, but you do have a very special way of blending. And I think for a clinician and for a researcher, it's something that's unique about Courtney, and I think it's unique about you and many other great people. The ability to be a fantastic researcher, scientist, being methodical, following scientific methodology, and having a real good head on your shoulders, and at the same time having a heart that is open, that cares, that can see other people, that's sensitive, and can kind of do what's needed to step up and be there for other people. Not everybody blends those two sides. Some people are strong at one and inept at the other, and that's good, but there are very few like you that really, bring it together. So I'm so grateful, that we connected, and what you contributed to that project was tremendous. Do you remember when we went to, maybe to share a highlight or two from that the interview process, and you did the lit review. That was your part, and then
Yes.
Andrew did the interviews. What was something you remember from that stage? And then maybe we can jump ahead to that preparation in Atlanta, which maybe was your first professional, presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, from our first meeting, I just remember that, just like you're saying, how important it is to blend the research with the heart and the mind with the heart. I had seen that through Dr. Byrd, and I remember in what you were saying and how important it is to connect with your clients and to relate to them and to meet them where they are. I think that coming out of just, I had never been outside of my institute bubble, and I was just amazed to hear that you shared a similar philosophy in that sense. And from that point forward, we met, I think, weekly, and you would kind of update me on clients that you had seen and share different stories and treatment dilemmas, which was so critical. I was a junior undergrad, and to have that kind of, clinical insight was really formative. And it showed me the different routes that treatment could take. And then at the same time, I was working on this, literature review on best practice in stuttering treatment, and really broadening my understanding of what approaches there are. And this idea of best practice is really more complicated than it sounds. And that was one of actually my first, I did an undergraduate research project with Dr. Byrd, which was also really enriching and really laid the foundation for a lot of the projects that I've done since then. In Israel, though, when I was there, that was also one of the first research opportunities that I had to kind of dive in, read through the literature. And I think before that, pre-college Robyn would have heard the word research and thought, oh, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if I can do that. I'm not sure if I'm interested in that. But in researching best practice in treatment, I found, oh my God, this is fascinating. I could read about this all day. I could talk about this all day. And I would say that was one of the critical opportunities that led to me pursuing the path that I'm in now, because until you do it, you don't know if it's something that you enjoy doing. And through the internship, through that study, I had the opportunity to at least try. And turns out, I loved it and I learned a lot. And then you introduced me to Andrew, who I believe at the time was 16, 17.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
he was
like,
like a man child. I think he
yes,
was in his sophomore, junior year in high school.
he is just this incredible, wise, so brilliant, personable person. And I'm like, who is this kid who is doing this entire research project? And I was just happy to be a part of it. But yes, having the opportunity to connect with him and then with all three of us in Atlanta, Georgia for the conference, never could have foreseen that. But yeah, that was my first oral presentation at a conference.
I remember before going on stage, you were there, Andrew was there, my dad was there, I was there. We were in some, space where we were kind of like cramming, and I think y'all had your sheets and your notes, and I just was like, it's gonna be great, just lean in, and everybody, you and Andrew and I, doing the typical pre-game ritual. And that's also interesting, by the way, just as an aside, when you look at temperament, so like as therapists, when we look at people that come in for help, it's so important to see, does this person, in addition to looking for help in, let's say, stuttering or fitness or learning a new sport, are they kind of like reactive, or they're kind of like loose and easygoing? And so I think the way different people cope is so interesting, seeing people in different situations. So for me, I just talk myself through it, and I'm like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Other people like hyper prepare. They're really vigilant. They want to like over prepare. It's very telling, isn't it, of like coping and also temperament, which is important in living life and also helping others. Just an observation, but a great memory. Yeah. So what was your memory of that in Atlanta? What was that like for you?
Yes, it's so funny to hear you talk about how people react to different types of stress, because that kind of energy that you brought was really helpful for me, who I think otherwise probably would have been over preparing to the max. You know, we all have our challenging areas, and presenting, I think, is very hard. Just I don't know. So it was really helpful for me to see that modeled, to see, okay, this can be important to me and I can want to do well. And I can approach it in a grounded, calm, confident way. I remember you, me, and Andrew, we were kind of practicing, just running through it beforehand. And I was trying to like deliver what I had written in like a very precise way. And you're like, Robyn, as long as you say every word with purpose, you're gonna be fine. It's gonna be great. And I thought, you know what? Let me give that a try. And so I tried it, and you were like coaching me through it. And by the end, I really did feel a lot better. There's something really empowering about realizing it's what you say that comes authentically. And that's something that Dr. Byrd has coached me through too. It's something that's, I think, going to take a lifetime to work on in that setting. But that was definitely step one. And seeing that modeled was really helpful. During the actual presentation, I definitely like blacked out and kind of, you know, I couldn't tell you specifics about what I said or how it went, but I do remember feeling relieved afterwards and feeling grateful for the opportunity.
If you're watching, just to bring you up to speed, so Robyn and I are just talking about the stage where she was still starting off, and before she launched into her early stage one launch, which she is deep into. She's almost in orbit. But back then, she was really just getting started at the launch pad, and we had this opportunity to connect, and we did this amazing project, and she was extraordinarily superior to what most people her age would be able to do. And we teamed up with Andrew, who's another outstanding young man, and then that just makes it easier for me. But we're just reflecting on this research study we did when Robyn was an intern and the presentation we did. If you can give comments, drop questions, likes, shares, you will help this conversation reach more people that probably would like to hear it. So we thank you for that. And again, the playback, if you missed anything, will be available. So I think a lot of people don't know that. It's available. We always put it up afterwards on schneiderspeech.com/our-blog. So you just go to our homepage, click on the blog, and you can just search and see all the past 30 something conversations. Robyn, you know, awesome. Let's bring it forward a little bit. So then, like, where did things go from there? Because I know you had a couple decisions to make in terms of grad school and then after grad school, and obviously you keep coming back to UT Austin and Dr. Byrd and stuttering. So, you know, what's kept you coming back, and what are you deep in these days?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of, you know, stuttering, I knew that I was interested in it. Definitely personally, I had the opportunity to work with a couple clients when I was a junior and a senior, which I think that exposure through the institute and through getting clinical experience at that age was really important, and laying the foundation. And yes.
For those that don't know, I see some people asking, what are we talking about? Who's Dr. Byrd? What's the institute? You know, maybe just give us a little bit of context for those that don't know, and also obviously the recent news is pretty significant too.
Yeah, so the Lang Stuttering Institute is a nonprofit within UT Austin. Dr. Courtney Byrd is the founding director. She's a professor at UT. She is a speech language pathologist, graduate advisor, and the Institute provides free treatment to children who stutter, adults who stutter as well, and education to their families. We have group therapy, individual therapy based in Austin. That's the synopsis. We're focused on overall communication effectiveness. And more recently, Dr. Byrd secured a 20 million grant through the Arthur Blank Foundation.
Sorry, I think I blanked out there. How much was that? What was that?
It's a $20 million dollar grant, which I know has been a work in progress and will really just allow us to expand what we offer to um, multiple states, multiple countries over the next 10 years or so, and just allow us to serve more people. And we're really excited, really thrilled, and just looking forward to all that's to come. But Dr. Byrd is also my PhD mentor. I've known her since I was a sophomore and has been pretty central, I would say, to my journey. And she's the executive founding director of the New Blank Center for Stuttering Education and Research.
Now you have wonderful parents, obviously, because someone like you doesn't just fall out of nowhere. But as going back to your book analogy, you know, are you my mother? I think Courtney Byrd is more likely to be that person than me, but she certainly, for you and so many people, has been such a meaningful mentor in terms of giving so much of herself and steering people in a certain direction and putting wind under their wings. So, you know, kudos and shout out to Courtney. For those that don't know, Courtney created a camp. A lot of colleges have these camps for young people who stutter. To be fair, I think it's more like a therapeutic experience that's fun. And in the summer, I think camp just sounds a heck of a lot better. And frankly, I'd love to call everything I do camp. Like, hey, let's have a meeting at the office. Let's call it camp. But whatever it is, what's special is that Courtney has put effort into thinking about how to create structure so that it can be replicated, and it's already been replicated in other countries and other sites. And Courtney and I talked about, Dr. Byrd and I talked about eventually getting it to the Middle East, and I'm super excited to see, you know, people from different countries, from different backgrounds, coming together around this thing called stuttering, which is kind of like a equal opportunity challenge. It doesn't discriminate, so it doesn't depend on socioeconomic factors or nationality or language. It's really present around the world in the same kind of way and prevalence. And what's also fascinating, which you could see in the movie Transcending Stuttering, our documentary, or any other stuttering work, is that there are universal experiences around it, right? So I think that the things that work in Texas can really work elsewhere, because even though Texas is the Lone Star State, it's its own little country, the experience of stuttering is something that has no boundaries and can be a unifier, can bring people together, which is also neat. So you see people from different backgrounds kind of suddenly gelling because they have this common intimate experience, and it can be very powerful to have that. So anyway, that's just some of the great stuff. And Dr. Byrd is also super prolific and presenting around the world, and she's involved also with the Stuttering Foundation with their educational development side. So awesome. So what's your doctorate? What's your focus? What are you looking at? And shout out to Kurt Eggers, our buddy from Europe, and Sarah Bryant and Elizabeth Rosenbaum from England, and Ari from New York, and Adam from upstate New York. Drop your comments, your questions. This is your chance. It's great to see everybody this morning. Comments, shares, likes, really helpful. So Robyn, what's your focus in your doctoral project?
Yeah, I would say that I am most focused on these different psychosocial factors that can influence how people who stutter experience the impact. That's one area. So looking at things like how self-compassion, which is kind of a buzzword right now, but it's actually a measurable construct. I'm looking at how these practices of mindfulness, self-kindness, social connectedness relate to the reactions that people have to their speech, how it relates to how they treat themselves before, during, and after difficult moments, and ultimately how it relates to their overall quality of life. So in the study that we recently did, we found that those two constructs, self-compassion and impact of stuttering on quality of life, are very highly related. And that the more self-compassion you have, the reduced negative impact you also have. Now we have a lot more work to do to see what moderates that relationship, whether self-compassion in itself is a moderator, or a mediator between, say, a stressful event and the potential negative impacts that event has. But I think there's something really powerful in that idea of giving yourself compassion, because as much as we want to give our clients the tools that they need to be successful, to feel confident, to be accepting of whether they stutter or not, we can't control everything that happens outside of that room. We can't always control how other people react. And so if you have this tool that you can give yourself compassion and be there for yourself at the very least when things don't feel good, because they won't always feel good, that could be a powerful concept. So that's one area that I'm looking into. Another is how self-disclosing that you stutter can influence listener perception. So on the one hand, I'm looking at the person who stutters and what they can do to reduce that negative impact. On the other hand, looking at it from the side of the listener and looking at what can the person who stutters do to reduce these misconceptions and to improve listener perception, so that the person can stutter and they can stutter openly and they can tell their listener, hey, I'm a person who stutters. And the study that I did or that I helped with rather, when I was a senior, was looking at when people who stutter tell their listener in a more informative and in a neutral way, hey, I stutter, you might hear me repeat sounds or phrases, versus apologizing, saying sorry, which, yes.
There's so much here. I just want to pace it. Can we dive into the first thing and then jump into the second one? Because I think for people that are watching, or tell other people to watch, because this is important stuff. This is where the really interesting things are happening right now in the research in the field. You know, just really quickly to bring you up to speed, there's two sides to the stuttering experience, essentially. For some people, it's heavier on one. For others, it's the other way around. Sometimes 50-50, sometimes 80-20, 20-80. There's the, you know, the visible, audible, sensory experience that we could see someone stuttering. So that's like very easy to see. It's above the surface. We can see it, we can hear it. And until pretty recently, that was what most people were focused on measuring, both in terms of the severity of the problem and also in terms of what therapy we were doing, what we were working on, and in terms of looking at progress and wellness and readiness to take a break and, you know, be done, or be, the word I hate, discharged. But there's another side of stuttering that all of us that understand it know, and that is not visible. It's not on the surface. It's what's going on the inside of a person. It's not the moment of interruption. It's the anticipation of that moment, which is invisible. It's the feeling of, is she going to say yes? Is he going to laugh at me when I go over to him? Is the teacher going to give me that extra moment? Is the person next to me going to snicker? So my father likens it to, you know, you get mugged in a bad part of town, it's a bad moment. And then the next time you go to that part of town, you're already bracing yourself. Now, nothing has happened yet, but you're still experiencing the effect and the conditioning that that has had on you. And so that's, for people who stutter often, to some degree, there can be, you know, greater or lesser and different types, but often some element of this invisible attitudes and feelings and thoughts, and it really shakes things up. And only recently are we looking at that and dealing with that, and it can't just be healed by just looking at techniques of physicality and behavior at the lips. So the research that you were talking about, that was just like little preamble. Was that okay? How'd I do?
Yes, yes, very helpful. That framing provides a lot of context, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I need context. I get very confused. So the same, by the way, the same thing that happens to me when I talk to you is the same thing that happened when I spoke with Jerry Maguire. Like, I just need to get grounded and like bring things back down to earth, because the two of you, you're like on another level. So, right. So the first thing was the self-compassion thing. I'm really interested in that. It sounds really wishy-washy. I'm a pretty wishy-washy kind of guy, but how did you look at kind of eliminating other variables and things, and kind of like really looking at the impact specifically of self-compassion? And I think the exciting thing about that study, or that line of thinking, is what you were saying, and I'll just bounce it and filter it through my frame, would be like, right, in the office, we can give people encouragement and boost them up and blow up their helium. But at the end of the day, they go back to their life, whether it's that week or whether it's when we go back home and we stop meeting them. The idea is to move it from the person being dependent on us to having their own independence, right? Being able to self-generate that strength and be able to even do some self-healing. So can you share anything about the specifics of how you kind of tease that apart in your looking at that? And then we could talk about the disclosure, because I'm super excited and interested in that too.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that we're still in the process of teasing it apart. We know that self-compassion, as measured by the self-compassion scale, and then the impact of stuttering as measured by the OASIS, the overall assessment of the speaker's experience, that those two constructs are highly correlated, right? That self-compassion predicts the other. And while we did collect data on other factors that we thought might influence that relationship, things like support group involvement, treatment and enrollment, and what they're targeting during treatment, because theoretically, these other involvements would influence the relationship between self-compassion and the impact of their speech, or it would predict whether they have high self-compassion or not. So that in itself is a really interesting question. Unfortunately, in our sample, we didn't have enough data for those points to analyze whether it's a significant relationship or not. But that is something that we're looking into, because we know that from other populations that there are many factors that could influence how self-compassionate a person is or not. And I think that the tricky thing is like a chicken or the egg situation of what comes first. A person enrolls in treatment and that makes them more self-compassionate, or what research might say is that you have to have this baseline level of being self-compassionate in order to seek out treatment. And so there are a lot of different questions to answer, including looking at, is self-compassion something that can be developed, something that can be cultivated? And again, in other populations and other settings, the answer seems to be yes, through different exercises, through journaling. I mean, there are so many different avenues to cultivating this, but you know, part of it, there's just so much to figure out in terms of what is influencing this relationship between self-compassion and a potential negative impact.
I think it's amazing and critically important that we're looking at ways to look at the impact of some of these things that people kind of pass as alternative or wishy-washy. I think it's really important and exciting what you're doing. I would be interested, you probably have already thought about it, or you could just put it in the back of your head, but like I always am interested by people. Again, temperament is something, and we talked about this from very early on when we were together. Temperament is so important. Ed Conter really got that in my head. And so I think about people who are like highly reactive, or people who have like a heavy tendency to go dark. Not everybody has that. Like some people go through tough times and they just bounce back again and again and again. And other people, they get knocked down, and they get knocked down hard. It's really hard to get back up. So I wonder, in what you're doing or in future work, if looking at like the profile of the individual, how likely they would be to be a candidate for this kind of impact, and how likely it would be a waste of time to think that, you know, what worked for the less reactive, more uppity spirit was really helpful. They took it and ran with it, and wow, that was awesome. Whereas for another person, it could even be like disrespectful in a way. In other words, kind of just, what are your thoughts, or what have you already kind of thought about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And on a broader level, that's a question I think about all the time as I treat people, you know, clinically. I was doing my CF and I just finished, which is exciting. But I think about that all the time, how I see 2, 3, 4 adults who stutter. Each one of them has a different temperament, different personality, and stuttering impacts them significantly differently. And so that question of how does temperament influence the experience? How does it influence treatment when we're giving similar but tailored and individualized treatment to each person? How does it influence that? In terms of self-compassion, I think that, at least based on other literature, a barrier to using this as a technique is the misconception that self-compassion is somehow weak or selfish or means that you hold yourself to a lower standard. I think there are a lot of potential barriers that could be between a person needing self-compassion and a person using it. And unless you address those barriers head on, then those are going to exist. It's like a misconception about anything. You have to bring it to light and dispel that myth. But we also know that self-compassion typically encourages people to hold themselves to an even higher standard, because they know that even if they fail, they'll be there for themselves and that they'll keep on going, rather than having this standard that is unreachable, that it's either 100% or nothing. So back to your original question about temperament, I could see, just based on other research, people with different temperaments responding differently to this type of technique. I would also hope that there's some flexibility there as people learn more of what self-compassion is and more of the evidence base behind it, rather than this kind of feel-good technique that sounds nice, but what does it actually do for me? I think coming back to the data, especially for those who are driven by that, is really, really important.
One of the things that came up for me as I was listening to you, Julie Jackson on our team, she said something in a meeting that stayed with me for many months already. She said, we think of speech strategies as strategies, and we think of counseling as like, oh yeah, that stuff. And she was saying how like we need to realize and we need to transmit to ourselves, to our colleagues, and to the people that we serve, their speech techniques, and then they're like emotional techniques, or whatever you call them, strategies, that the emotional self-care that you're talking about, the self-compassion, the self-love, the self-care, being your own safety net, knowing that you can catch yourself, or that you have the wherewithal to pick yourself up, or find the things that will soothe you or get you back up. That's a strategy, no less than some other physical strategy that might be out there. So I think that's just something I wanted to bring up from Julie. And what you said was so profound. Everyone in some measure can tap into this, and of course different people are going to have different ways. I'm thinking of one analogy that I like to share, and then we'll go to your current what you were talking about with Courtney with the disclosure. An analogy I like, parents will ask, well, like my teenage child, son, daughter, they're not like moving quick enough. Like, how do I help them pick up the pace? How do I help them expand their comfort zone? And some people would say, well, you just got to put them up at the mic, just shove them up there. There's nothing like sink or swim. And then other people, like, they might think, either because they feel that way for themselves, or they project that their kid might, or they intuitively feel that for their kid that could be not the best thing. So I often tell parents, like, ask yourself, if you were going away for like a 3-day weekend and you had like this nice house to yourself, like an Airbnb or something, and there was this amazing swimming pool, and it's like the third morning and little Johnny hasn't gone in the pool yet. And you're just like, come on, Johnny, like in a day we're going home. This was like a 3-day vacation. We got the place with the pool just for you. We got the floaties, we got the floating basketball thing, we got everything is set up, and like you haven't gone in. There's the diving board, there's the space. Come on. So I tell him, like, what would Johnny need in that situation? Because probably the same thing he might need there, we can extrapolate to this situation. So is he the kid that just needs to be shoved in? Like, he's not going to jump in until he gets a little push, and that might be what he needs. Is he the kind of kid who needs you to just kind of hold his hand and say, hey, Johnny, we're in this together. We're going to hold hands. We're going to jump in. I'm not going to let you go. If anything happens, I got you. Or is he the kind of kid that you just need to let him take his dandy old time, because anything you do is just going to reset the clock? I think about that often, and I think it relates to a little bit of what you're talking about, is like tuning into, when we're working on stuttering or anything related to these things, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? The same way we react or have our temperament or have our personality show up with this is usually consistent with the way it shows up in other things. So we can also be informed, like when we're really in a conundrum, how to help our spouse, how to help our kid, how to help our parent, whatever. Thinking about, well, what do they seem to appreciate and what seems to set them off in other situations? And let's just kind of like inform ourselves from that. So I just wanted to share that. I think that's sometimes helpful.
Yes. Well, and it makes me think, like, in a stuttering therapy context, about the therapeutic alliance, which is what I did my master's thesis on, which I loved reading about that and learning about that. And that's a continued area of interest for me, is how clinicians tune in to their clients. And it's exactly what you're saying, that for one individual, shoving them in might be the best approach, for the other, holding their hand, for another, something else. And it takes that attunement and really reading those soft cues and reflecting back all of those counseling skills to build that alliance, which again, in like psychotherapy literature, that relationship on itself has been shown to be more predictive of outcome than the actual treatment. And in the stuttering research, I think we're starting to delve into that area. But just given research on the other side from people who stutter, reporting that they're misunderstood by their treatment provider, that they're not satisfied. We look and we ask why. Is it because of the treatment? Is it because they feel like they're not working on what they want to be working on, or the pace? It could be any of those things, but it all comes back to that relationship. So yeah, I really appreciate what you just said about just being in tune with your client.
Listen, I might be Shake Master Schneider, but that was such a smooth transition. Talking about alignment, what a transition to disclosure, which the way I picture that is like almost like a jail cell visit. Like there's a glass wall between you and the other person, and you don't know exactly what they're thinking, but you kind of just leave it hanging there. And what disclosure can do, and I share this in our online video course, the Transcending Stuttering Academy, where I put everything together. The idea is you could take down that glass wall. I almost think of it as like Ronald Reagan and the Berlin Wall. Tear down that wall, because until that happens on your side, you're wondering, oh, what are they going to think? Or, oh, like I hope they don't assume that, or maybe they won't notice. There's like all these thoughts, but the one thing that's happening is you ain't connected to the other person. Big barrier, because you're caught in your own head. And then what's interesting, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize, often the listener is having their own conundrum. Okay, I want to connect with this person, and there's this thing, and I can tell that it's a little bit of an elephant in the room. I'm not sure how to touch it. I'm not sure how to address it. I want to, but I don't want to make them uncomfortable. So there's this incredible tension and barrier.
Yes.
Back to your alignment, I just want to give one tip for everybody. If you're a therapist or you're whatever, working with kids coming home, your own kids coming home, or you're a teacher, we use this 1 to 10 for everything. So I'll ask a client, like 1 to 10, how was today's meeting? And if they're like 8, I'm like, awesome. What was good? And what would have made it a 10? Like, what was there too much of, or what was missing, so that next time we could jack it up? If you're a person who's not being asked that question, offer the feedback. I'm a big fan of the work of Jeb Brown. You can look him up. Amazing statistician who did some really good metadata on some of the things that you were talking about, Robyn, about psychotherapy and psychopharmacology, or different approaches of psychotherapy, and how much therapeutic alliance proved to be such an X factor. It wasn't about the talent of the clinician or the experience of the clinician. It really had to do with how well did they create understanding and get behind the goals of the person who was coming to get somewhere. So checking in became the metric that they started using, and they saw their results just go through the roof. So we basically every visit do that. And I also do it with my kids. How was today? How was that outing? Whatever. How was Shabbat? Whatever. So that's a great little practical thing people might want to take away. Bring us to disclosure. What's the latest and greatest? And I think it's really interesting. I think it's thought of often as a binary thing. Like, do you open up? Do you come out of the closet? But there's so much more to it, right? Because if you come out and you say, like, listen, bear with me, I stutter. I'm sorry. I know. Look, I'm disclosing. I know I'm a burden. It's going to take a little extra time. You set it up in that way. You couch it, right? But I think what you might share is how Courtney's looked at the different words we use. The choice of words can really change our world, right? Words create worlds. And when you use language, being mindful of language that's hot or cold or neutral, and the impact, maybe you could just elaborate, because I think that's really exciting, valuable stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, you really just said it perfectly. The way that a person,
Just scratching the surface. You're the one in the trenches. You're the one with Dr. Bird really rolling up your sleeves. I am just a student sitting on the wall.
that is how I feel every day of my life. So, but what you said is really exactly it. That when a person who stutters, or really anyone, self discloses something about themselves, the listener mirrors how we are. If we are confident and we're comfortable, the listener feels comfortable. If we're apologetic and embarrassed and ashamed, the listener feels awkward. And we don't only know this anecdotally, but that's what our study looked at. So we looked at when people who stutter self disclose in an informative manner, meaning they tell the listener that they stutter, they briefly explain what that means. You may hear me repeat sounds or words. If you have any questions, please ask, versus apologizing. So saying, I stutter, bear with me, I've been working on it for a long time. Or I stumble over my words. It might be hard for me to talk. That kind of self-deprecating language versus not saying anything about it at all. And what we found is that the person who stutters, who self-disclosed in an informative manner only, they were viewed as being significantly more confident, more friendly, more intelligent, more outgoing. And these are all traits that are in direct contrast to the stuttering stereotype that people who stutter are shy, nervous, insecure, right? When a person self discloses, they're viewed as having more of the traits that are in complete contrast to those other misconceptions.
I'm not going to say the name for a reason, which may or may not be understood, but that's okay. Just a few conversations ago, I spoke with an amazing woman, and she was talking about this kind of like dance of wanting to be totally open. And on the other hand, on the one hand, she is open. She had a conversation with me about something that's very intimate and personal, and it's obviously in the public domain. And at the same time, there are certain places where she still wants to keep it personal, quiet, not out in the public domain. So first of all, I think that's fascinating, and that like we make that okay, right? That it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be again binary, it has to be all or nothing. But what was
Absolutely.
fascinating was she asked me to give her some feedback or something to think about. And I said, well, I guess I'm wondering, what do you think would happen if you did kind of open up in that new sphere where you haven't yet? Like, don't do it, right? Or I even said, let's make it third person. Imagine there was another lady, Susie, and she had the same conundrum. What would you tell her? Like, you
Right.
know, and when she actually went into that in a safe kind of way, and
Mhm.
we got past the reactivity and the trauma and the fear and all the thoughts racing and the feelings raging, um, she said, I think they'd respect me. I think they,
Mhm.
so it's fascinating how our minds and our emotions sometimes get in our own way, right?
Right.
Isn't that interesting? So I think it's amazing. What more could you share? Because I think the other cool thing is people think that's like an East Coast, West Coast, or progressive Austin thing. But I think
Mhm.
Courtney has really shown, Dr. Bird has shown cross-cultural, right? Because you've looked at, can you talk a little bit about that? How this is a truth?
Absolutely, yes. So more recently, we replicated it in Israel. So we replicated the exact same study in a different cultural context, in a different linguistic context. And the results held true in the sense that self disclosing in an informative manner seems to be the most beneficial in terms of improving listener perceptions. And that's across a different country, a different culture, and a different language. And, I think that what many people who stutter will say anecdotally is that the way that it feels to self disclose in an informative versus an apologetic way, it feels different. It feels different when you're actually saying it out loud. And so, what we're seeing in our most recent research is, yeah, so self disclosing cross culturally for the person who stutters can be beneficial. And there's still a lot of work to do in terms of how does the person who stutters feel as they're saying it out loud? And does that differ in a different cultural context?
Since we're talking about culture, let's take an extra moment, not too much more, but I
Mhm.
did want to honor that we've got our good friend Gareth Walcom from Belgium Mr. Virtual Reality himself. If you haven't already, check out his videos from the Australian Speakeasy Conference and the Canadian Stuttering Association Conference. He has a question for you. He says, I noticed in your self-compassion paper, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but people
okay.
actually read it. People
I
actually
love
read it. That's
that.
what's
Thank
cool.
you for reading it.
So Garrett says that in that self-compassion paper, the self-compassion scores were similar between genders. Did you notice any difference in the results between ages, let's say, if you split it between ages? And I'm really interested in that too. I think the idea of readiness for change or readiness to do courageous things, I think there's a window early on, and then I think it gets tougher probably at a certain like teen, early 20s finding yourself, but then it's easier later at like 50. But what were your findings? What did you see in the reading?
That's a great question. First, thank you so much for, reading it and for asking this. For that study, we actually didn't look at age. So I can't speak definitively as to how age influenced it. I can say that in other areas and other literature, age does seem to predict that self-compassion increases as a person ages. That's an area that I'm also really interested in. Given that stuttering affects people across the lifespan. I mean, at the Institute, right, we work with, and I'm sure that you do too, or with people from age 2 to 82. And to see how stuttering evolves and how perception and experience and resiliency to adverse experiences influences their current perception, I think is really interesting. So I love that you asked that question and would definitely love to look into it in the future.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that says a lot that Robyn is doing research that people are actually reading, already tells you, that she's doing work that's like real life relevant, like most research, the studies show most research is not read. So if someone's reading your stuff, that is a big step up. You pop on this Facebook Live, boom, and Gareth pops in from Belgium. I love that. I love it. Sarah Bryant also had some comments about the importance of the language. Not only does it set the tone for the listener, but the language also influences the speaker. So, our emotions often get laced onto our voice in a very deep way. They also get laced into the words, and then vice versa. It can be like a reverb kind of thing where you get like the words you use can put you in a certain state. They can put you in a certain mentality. Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, we're just getting warmed up. But we are going to wrap, but I just wanted to share the idea of the lifespan, and Gareth's question is so interesting, and Robyn, your interest in that I think says a lot. I wanted to just share that, and I shared this on a previous one, I think right after I did a Facebook Live, a friend of mine, his name is also Uri, his name is Uri Lazar, and he wrote to me and said he wanted to just share this and that people can feel free to know, reach out to him, whatever. I set up mentorship and things with him. He said, it's been 40 years since my bar mitzvah. I'm 53 years old. This has nothing to do with Judaism. But for 53 years, since that very public moment, that very public experience of kind of getting up there, that rite of passage in front of the community, being a young person who stutters, and what a challenging, stressful experience that was, he always turned it down for the next year, decade, and the next, and the next. And then at 53, 40 years later, he steps back up on the plate. So I think I just want to highlight that, clearly things change, shift happens, and hang in there, whether you're a professional caring for someone who you don't think is moving quick enough, whether you're a parent hoping and waiting that this was going to be the birthday, this was going to be the month, this was going to be the week. Sometimes you just got to hang in. People blossom in their own speed and their own time. But at the same time, I think that's where early intervention in a non-conventional way makes a lot of sense, that we need to help parents and young people acquire that self-compassion and acquire that self-image early on. I'll close with this one thing that I think you'll like this very much. You can take this back and share it with Dr. Byrd, see what she thinks. Parents are often worried and scared to open up the conversation about stuttering because they don't want to make it a bigger thing. And the kid hasn't brought it up yet. So why should I bring it up? On the other hand, of course, I want to give them a feeling that it's an open. So I tell parents sometimes, it's like the conversation of the birds and the bees. Nobody wants to have that conversation. Everyone wants to, but you never feel like it's the right time. When they were 7, 17, you just don't want to go there. And what I say is, like, if you don't have that conversation and you wait too long, someone else will. And if it's a sensitive matter that you want to have influence and you want to shape the person's perception for life and set them on a course of how they see themselves when they look in the mirror, it behooves us to get a little bit out of our comfort zone and maybe initiate it a little sooner than we might have, because the opportunity is a window. And if we can get in early, we can really have a big influence in the way young people grow up, whether they end up being people who stutter or grow out of it, addressing what is. It is what it is, making it more neutral, having a way to talk about it, create a language that works. I have a video on our blog about this, how to talk about these things, and finding the language to talk about it could be one of the most helpful things anyone could do, much more than fixing the physical condition. But by doing these things, you can also just get out of the way and get a lot of that emotional tension and mental tension released, so that perhaps just natural development takes its course, or whatever it is doesn't become a distraction greater than it needs to be. Robyn, we gotta have like a campfire 4-hour powwow. You, me, Andrew, cup of coffee, some tea, my
Yes.
dad, Courtney. Let's do it.
I would love that. That sounds great.
Masks,
Count me
socially
in.
distanced in Austin.
Love
Let's do
it.
it. Let's do it. Listen, keep up the great work. Send our warm regards to everybody at UT Austin. But I am proud to say I knew you when. You are something special, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to get in early and have this chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ori. Thank you so much.